Hey, what's up? It's Sunny in Colorado, and today I wanted to cover fiduciary duties. This is once you have somebody else, a third party, sign one of your contracts to say that you are going to represent them. Your duties to that particular client are your fiduciary duties to your client. These are things that you cannot fray from, and you need to perform at the best of your abilities as a real estate agent for your client. All right, so let's get started. All right, so there's 6 fiduciary duties, and an easy acronym to remember these is OLD CAR. OLDCAR. OLD CAR. Okay, and the first one, O, is going to stand for obedience. We can go through this like Sesame Street. But O is going to stand for obedience. I know that sounds crazy, like obedience. Like, what am I, a slave? No, that's not what we're talking about. When it comes to obedience, it means that you're going to do everything that's legal that your particular client asks you to do. So, for example, let's say there's a $400,000 house. It is market value of $400,000 house. You agree with that. You tell your client, yep, this house looks great. I think $400,000 is a great price for it, with blah, 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 blah. Your conversation goes on. And your client's like, I want to put in a offer of $300,000. Now, knowing that, you know that more than likely that offer is going to be objected. That is not your duty. Your duty is to do what your client wants you to do and submit that at 300. You can advise them and explain the market value and everything, but your client can still hold fast and say, I want you to send in a $300,000 offer on this house that is $400,000. Even if you're going to feel like an idiot submitting that, it is your obligation to submit that. On the other side of that is the same way of someone overpaying for something. So if your client wants to give $500,000 on a $400,000 house that maybe is even $380,000, you can advise them that you don't need to go that far. That's not your job. Your job is just to put in that offer. Your obedience to your client is to do what they say as long as it's legal. All right, so just remember that. Obedience to your client. That is the O in OLD CAR. All right, moving on to the L in OLD CAR. Loyalty. Okay, so loyalty. What does loyalty cover? What does loyalty mean in your fiduciary duty to your client? Loyalty means that because a soccer ball game is coming up at the same time your client wants to go do a showing, your obligation to your client is to be loyal to them and go show them the house they want to see that happens to be happening at the same time of a soccer game that you want to participate in. If you went and participated in that and told your client that you're unavailable, you just failed at performing your fiduciary duties to your client, and you probably have some liability there if your client finds out about it. So don't do this. Always put your client first. Their needs must be handled. You know, it's one thing for you to be in a car accident and you can't make it, but for you you're tired, you don't feel like doing it, that's a no-go, and you may be held liable for that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Loyalty, OLD CAR, OL. Obedience and loyalty. Okay, this was a really big one. Disclosure. D is for disclosure. Okay, and this means disclosing everything, providing the documents that you need to provide by law wherever you're performing. Here in Colorado, there are particular disclosures that you're going to be applying to the contract up front and right away. You know, and one of those things could literally be the something as simple as the disclosure of our relationship, our working relationship. That is a disclosure. Lead paint in a house that was built before 1978, so there can be lead paint. You have to provide a disclosure of making your client aware of what lead paint is, the dangers, and how you deal with it. So they are aware, and then they can make the educated decision to continue on and close that contract. So that is something, any kind of disclosure, no matter what it be. If there's something you find out about this home, you find out that the home is in a floodplain, or let's say you find out that that home had a leaky roof, or you find out that something is broken in the home and then you just got told about it, some attic fans that are out. These things you are obligated to disclose to your client so they are aware of what they're truly getting into, and then they can make the decision to do so. Now, when you provide these, even if it is of the simplest disclosure of you just telling your client something, let's say you're just texting them something and say, hey, I just want to let you know that I became aware of a big crack in that foundation that was not in the property disclosure. I just want to make you aware of that so you can hire an inspector to look into that and we can proceed forward if you want to. If you text that to them, make sure you keep that text in your files for that contract. So if something comes up and then your client or somebody says, nobody ever told me about this crack and now I have to pay thousands of dollars to fix the foundation on my house, you say, here's my record of explaining to you that this was, and I recommended what your recommendations were to fix the problem, and them also confirming that they still want to move forward. So make sure you always have these things, no matter what it is. Keep everything. If it's an email, that's the most simple way to keep track of it as a record is email your client about it, and then keep whatever their reply is to it's no big deal, we move forward, or it's a big deal, what do I do, and how you help them through it. Because if you get audited or they try to sue you, then you have all this information available to show that you provided all the necessary disclosures to your client as you assisted them with that contract. Okay, so moving on, that completes OLD, O-L-D, obedience, loyalty, and disclosures. Disclosures is super important, people. Make sure you're covering them all. When in doubt, reach out and ask somebody, your managing broker, okay? All right, let's start the car. All right, so C is for confidentiality. So anything your client tells you, unless they tell you that you can use that information to either sell the home or buy a home, then otherwise it is considered confidential, okay? Even when you close that contract and you move on with life and never talk to that client again, you still cannot share that information. Keep that in mind. Confidentiality means that you cannot share their information. The same way a lawyer may know something about their client that's something that's legal that they don't need to provide to anybody else, they hold that information forever. Not 10 years later on, you can talk about that client with somebody about a particular situation. So for example, if you have a seller and let's say they have to sell their home in 3 months, that is their part of their criteria. I need to sell this home in 3 months because I'm not going to be here. I'm leaving the state. Yeah, things can happen that the home doesn't sell within 3 months and you're going to have to deal with that, but it is not your responsibility. However, you cannot use that to the buyer, and the buyer comes and wants to buy the house and they use that, and you can't just say, oh, my client is leaving in 90 days and they want to sell this house as quick as possible. Now, unless your seller allowed you to use that information to make the sale, then that's fine. But until they give you permission, you cannot say that. Or let's say Bon Jovi's coming to town or something like that and they want to buy it. They might not want anybody to know that they're buying a particular home. So therefore, you may not be able to even disclose the seller's name. Due to privacy, my client does not want to be exposed. This is the home, blah, blah, blah. And they might use a different name on the contract or maybe their lawyer or something like that or their trust. But that can be another thing. So these are just simple things that you have to keep to yourself between you and your client. On the buyer side of that, maybe the buyer's like, I don't care if the house is $400,000. I will pay $500,000 for it. That don't mean you go to the seller and just be like, we can go up to $500,000, $100,000 over, give me the property. Unless your buyer tells you you can say that, you must keep that information confidential. But you can use it in your negotiations so you're allowed to move up because your buyer said and use more money in order to gain leverage. So confidentiality, remember, and it doesn't end at closing. Anything that was confidential in that particular contract remains confidential. All right, we got two more. The A in CAR is accounting. Okay, so you're keeping track of the escrow money, making sure that it got where it's supposed to go. All the right people have signed for that money. Making sure that the price of the house versus funds to be available, like all that stuff you're keeping track of to make sure that when you get to closing, all the funds are there and available in order for you to close that contract, okay? Make sure that they're the right type of funds. It's not a personal check that somebody just wrote and didn't tell you about it, and then right at the end it comes up that you didn't have the right funds, therefore you have to wait for these funds to clear because it's going to take 7 days for a check. Not that somebody can't use a check, but a check is going to take much longer, and there may be fees charged because of that. So just keep that in mind. You're keeping track of all the accounting as the transaction is occurring, so there's no surprises in the end. You advise your client and you let your client take action on that. All right, and the last letter in that acronym, R, responsible care. You're doing your due diligence, and everything that is within your professional abilities to do, you are doing to your client's best interest, okay? You're making sure that you got those HOA papers and there's nothing in them that are going to supply you. You know, you obviously want your client to read over, but it's also in your best interest for you to read over it and make sure that there's nothing that stands out in there that's really going to affect your client. Let's say your client has 3 cars and they're buying a house with a 2-car garage, and you find out in that HOA that you're not allowed to leave your car on the driveway. All cars must be in closed garages. Your client has a 3rd car. You want to make sure that your client is aware of that and how you can resolve that, whether your client's okay with putting that car in a storage someplace, and they're aware that it can't be left there. And then, you know, you're not making the decisions for them, but you're doing your due diligence once again, and you're practicing within your profession. You're not practicing outside. So, and if something comes up where they need to hire somebody else, let's say you know that there's something with the foundation, and it seems to be okay, that's not for you to make. You should advise them to hire an engineer to check that foundation, so that engineer can tell your client at their ability to perform their professional duties and advise them that, hey, that is okay and that's a normal crack in the foundation. You can move on. Okay, so responsible care is working in the highest service of your professional duties, not outside of that, but you are doing those due diligent things that you're supposed to be doing. So that covers your fiduciary duties. Remember, OLDCAR, OLDCAR, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and responsible care. All right, so make sure you're doing all those. If you need a checklist and what those things mean, go up looking up the dictionary terms and make sure you're covering all that for your client. If you have ever a day that you look at any of those things and you are not doing one of them, then you're wrong. All right, so agents, keep killing it out there. Do what you do. Stay every day a little bit better than you were yesterday, and always remember to keep moving forward. Till next time, once again, I thank you for hanging out at the Digital Agent Academy. If you have any questions about eXp brokerage or any questions about real estate, feel free to either put it down below or just reach out to me and we can talk about it. Take care and live well.